a talk that focuses on part of this introduction, which is e-governance and blockchain voting, and ultimately some systems beyond. And I'm lucky to be joined by Dr. Ulieru, who wrote the book on this subject, has described many of these concepts, even prior to the blockchain era to some degree. And so we're going to have some interesting discussion about best practices for e-governance, and how to not only build these systems, but build the political will and public interest in these ideas so that we can all benefit from these kind of systems. Because we run the very real risk of these systems not being used in the way that they could be. And these things could become, to some degree, orphan technologies where they are not being adopted if we are not able to convince folks that they are safe and convince folks that they are of value. And digitalization is of great value. And this is something that we want to see folks focusing on. I'll take a few moments and talk about my campaign and other work with e-governance. As we said, my name is Johan Ben Zion. I'm the United States Transhumanist Party presidential candidate for 2020. And my campaign slogan is "Radical Life Extension is closer than you think." But the focus of my campaign has also been on this digitalization in the public sector, and particularly e-governance and this i-voting system or blockchain voting system. And I was lucky enough to interview a gentleman named Florian Marcus, who is an Estonian e-governance minister, and we spoke at some length about their blockchain voting system. And in that country, 55% of voters are now using this blockchain voting system, and some of those voters still opt for the more traditional kinds of systems. But we have also other areas of e-services and e-governance that is makes this country head and shoulders above other countries in terms of this level of digitalization of government. And they have one of their most well-known programs internationally is a digital citizenship program, which allows folks to also be starting businesses in this country and making use of some of these other e-services from people who are not living in Estonia and not permanent residents there. Really interesting kinds of things. But because they have worked so hard since the 1990s to develop this premier e-government, now that they are also in a position to do something I mentioned in my campaign slogan about life extension. They have a public health service that is using data science in a very powerful way, and beginning to so now they are also, because they have raised the level of e-governance in all of these other disciplines in these public systems. Now they're able to begin to do this also with their public health system, and this could lead to much better public health outcomes and the things that people in my party want to see a radical life extension become a reality. And a few other small countries are doing this, and this could lead to a domino effect in the rest of the developed world, where other countries may be adapting this kind of preventative public health service, one that focuses on aging as a disease. That's something we really want to see. So all of these features of digitalization of government lead to very good outcomes and lower costs. And now, without further ado, let's turn to Mihaela and talk a little bit about e-government and how we get from where we are today, where we have very little of these services, to what that path might look like. So, what do you think, Dr. Ulieru? How do we convince people that this form of decentralized government is a good thing for them?
Exactly, especially with the individuals you have there, right? So it's all about how we apply it, and I have to say, very good choice with Estonia, which is doing it absolutely right. So, and by the way, you can become e-citizens of Estonia anytime you like. In case you want to benefit from the services, to enroll your companies there and benefit from all their support. It's a very innovative country. But of course, the digital environment, just like humanity, there's yin and a yang. So it has the good stuff and the bad stuff in it. And if we go to China, there's, for example, they implement it in a completely different way. So the thing is how we implement it, and I think we can implement it for the people. I've just been at a session in which the idea was that, okay, let's get off the digital environment and enhance our humanity first. Of course, I've been thinking about this for a long time as an expert in e-society, but I'm also a believer in e-society, so that's why I'm very happy with what you're doing and with your platform. because it's all about us and how we implement it. So we can put it to work for us. There is a new book called The 10 Arguments to Get Off Your Social Media right now. But of course, because how we design the social media platforms now in a predatory manner, and which is actually making us tick towards the negative, because apparently that's how we like to tick, and that's when we give more attention to the platform, is not the right way. So we have better ways to do it. And one example is the speaker in the other room was talking about the tragedy of the commons and how we are depleting nature and so on and so forth. And I did not actually see the connection with his plea to leave the digital environment, because in fact, this is what helps us. We can embed the right rules in the digital environment to steer us in the right direction. And Elinor Ostrom has studied that. She studied with a small community in California. So the idea is that if you have a common pool resource, a group of very well-intended citizens, they are selfish enough to deplete that common pool resource, so the whole community is going to starve in the end. But Elinor Ostrom came up with a few principles, which if you apply, everything can work. But of course, government top-down, it's too cumbersome to get involved in that. So we can practically embed the rules that everybody will receive either a nudge or a hint, when to get the water, how much water to consume, and so on and so forth, and then they can manage that very well. Without the digital environment, it would be impossible. So there are ways to do it much better.
And so you've described a more fully realized new sphere and and this socio-political dynamics that might lead to that. What about the kinds of e-services? What is an order of importance of what we should focus on? For example, we talked about digital citizenship. I think that blockchain voting is the first.
And I will go immediately to the blockchain voting. Yes. I just want to close what I wanted to say, because it's not that where are these rules? Yeah. So we have done simulations that actually embedding those rules can really have the positive results. So it is proven. You can find the work exactly in the book which Ben mentioned before. So when it comes to not only that, so of course blockchain is enabling us to do this in the first place. It is enabling us to also take possession of our data, which Facebook and Google are exploiting. So we have now the transition from the data is the new oil to data as currency. In fact, I'm rewarded for providing my data to the common pool resource, so that I can get better diagnosis, because my, the people in my community are sharing that data, or for many other reasons. So this is also a very good example, the voting which you mentioned, because of course many people do not get to vote, and I have to say yes. So yes, so. And it's not only here. You were talking about Estonia. Yes, if you're an e-citizen of yours, yes, there's no other way to vote. But also, if you are living in the US and you are also an Estonian citizen, you may want to vote, and that's the only way. Our military, of course, how do they vote? So definitely e-voting is extremely important, and how can it be done in an authenticated manner, certified?
It's a serious concern.
Exactly, but that's why here is where blockchain comes into the picture, because it actually authenticates, certifies, it shows that it's you. And not only for voting, but also all the certifications. For example, your diplomas can be put on blockchain, and then imagine if LinkedIn would be on blockchain with all the certifications behind what people claim that they do and who they are, it would be kind of a very good way for
Our partner in Poland is actually working on a credentialing system in that context.
I just wanted to say that the advantage of blockchain is it creates a permanent record that is immutable, that cannot be tampered with. Exactly. The challenge, I think, is linking identity to the blockchain, but there's many companies working on it, and that's where biometrics can be used. The technology is almost there, I think.
Yes, and sometimes people, when talking about blockchain voting, they want to focus on these cybersecurity concerns. But Estonia has relatively little problems. They have a two-factor authentication system that works quite well. The problem is not concerning ourselves with hackers in the United States. The problem is more concerning ourselves with these features of voter suppression in the United States and finding workarounds to get people able to participate more easily.
Right.
Not only voter suppression, but low voter turnout stems from the difficulty of voting. We should, many Democratic candidates in the current primary are campaigning on something like a voter holiday and other initiatives to make voting more accessible. And blockchain voting is the highest of that, achieving that very well. So these safety concerns are real, but in practice, this fully functioning blockchain voting system has not suffered, and there's been no rolling back of these services because of security concerns. There have only been very, very limited kinds of attacks of any kind, and they've not been particularly successful. So we should be very hopeful that this kind of system would work quite well.
Yes, and there are many private companies which are now developing technologies like Voter and so on, which are enhancing even more the security of identity, as you say. Yes. So in order to prevent manipulation, as the image here is.
Yes. Well, we did also want to talk a little bit about these prospects of blockchain voting and full e-governance. And I recently, a few weeks back, hosted a panel discussion on algocracy, AI-run governance, an exciting prospect. And you're an AI researcher with an incredible background. Could you give us a few musings on the future of AI-driven governance, and also thinking about selling this to folks? How do we convince folks that they could, humans will be always in the loop, and that this will be for their benefit? Because if we can convince them, I'm certain that the benefits will be great.
Absolutely, and as I was mentioning about Elinor Austria, we can take the same example for electricity or for anything, but in general, how we govern ourselves has been top down. I do not know if you allow me to use some slides to explain that in more detail, or you want a short answer. It all depends. That is the core essence of my work. so I have a full body of work.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious to hear about your work and what high level things you've learned in all your years of experience with government agencies, and because I think it's useful for people like technologists like us to learn.
And I have to say that I managed to decentralize the most stubborn government agencies, and that is, the emergency responders, the Department of Defense, the incident command system. This is how it is called. Yes, the incident command system. Decentralize that. And so the idea is that the incident command system is a very top-down organization, and this is what I want to talk about. So I'm going to
go
share with us your materials.
So how it works or how it doesn't work. Yes. So there are a few questions here. Yes, and you can have in mind a lot of things. But I was working with the emergency responders who could not work with each other, could not communicate with each other in the middle of a storm, for example, when they had to rescue people. They were like, who goes first? Where are the resources? They couldn't find them. They need 2 weeks to deploy all the resources to deal with a hurricane, for example. And that's where the algorithmic governance is helping, because you have all the skills digitally and you can assign them through your algorithm to optimally respond to that crisis. But of course, for any other application, it's easier, and therefore I want to illustrate it on this one. So the idea is, of course, then how do we do it? And we call this architecture of participation. Yeah, so these are participatory architectures can be done algorithmically. Of course, there are risks. Is it worth trying? But these are the main questions which we try to answer, especially how can we achieve effects with resources which we cannot control? Because if it's not incident command structure, top down, then wow, it may be risky to let people to be so free, right? Well, actually it's not, because if you have the right rules in the participatory architecture, then you can sort it out. So, okay, let's see. The idea is, how do we design the rules? And I look at that in an evolutionary manner. So it's like evolution actually has evolved rules for us to survive, to organize in society. Nobody taught us, right? Maybe for a long time, nobody taught us. We just learned from tribes. Yes, now it's like life, and then we evolve in larger societies. So now, can I actually replicate this? Can we take that wisdom and put it into the social network? And I call this the social network operating system. The idea is, and I was mentioning the incident command structures, and we're talking about organizations. It's on the organizational continuum, culture is structured by the conventions of coordination. With the incident command structure, with a dictatorial government. You know, it was how we actually are kind of used to be manipulated by government, as you are mentioning here. We are in centralized hierarchies. Yes, this is what we kind of know to function, or whatever is more convenient. Yes, if someone is telling me what to do and I just act as a cog. Yes. And then there are hierarchies, which are both top-down and bottom-up. And I think these are probably our most proven, yes, to work for society. But I would go one step further, yes, with the responsible autonomy, peer production. And this is where we can implement the small rules in those communities, as I was giving the example with the water, to collaborate in order to preserve the resource, but also to have enough for themselves. And we do not have that wisdom in ourselves, because we have our survival instincts, our selfishness. So it's good to have certain rules and these algocracies. The idea is that just like, you know, so this is how the top-down paradigm is working. We have the blueprint and we implement everything. But now you can go from person to person, from peer to peer, and put the rules there and let the people to self-organize. The simplest example is stigmergy, the ant colonies, which are totally decentralized, and they communicate through pheromones, so they leave traces. So if one ant finds a large source of food, let's say a honey pot, then it informs all the other ones because it leaves traces, and then they can organize themselves to find the shortest path from their colony to the food. So these small rules put in every basic block. The basic block is one ant. So they have that wisdom and communication. And we can use a similar strategy to organize society very efficiently, productively, and for the benefit of everyone. So, but unfortunately, yes, where we are now is that our education system, yes, we teach our children to not take risks, obviously. Yes, everything, our critical judgment, everything is lost already. And I want to say, in the mental cost of our education. So therefore, you know, we have to shift, and I'm hoping that your party is going to lead that shift, so we can, you know, co-create the future in a much better way. You mentioned my book. I don't know if you want, so you can stop me anytime, but I just want to give this example. And my book was called From Bitcoin to Burning Man and Beyond. Oh. Because we looked at the desert and cyberspace as sandboxes for experimentation. If we are to start it all over again, how would we do it better? And in Burning Man, obviously, yes, initially there were very few people, everything was fine. But then when the number of people increased, they didn't have any works, they wanted to be the rebels. And people died because they were drunk driving there and being too free. Yes, it's human nature. And then they started to create the rules among each other. So exactly from the bottom up, just like the ants. And they came up with the 10 principles of Burning Man, which creates now the wonderful experience every summer. And in my experiments with agents, with software agents, I came up with very similar principles, independent of that, because I was working before that. So we wrote this book with the Burning Man founder, with Eric Harvey, who now passed away. But it was amazing to see, yes, that in fact we found the same roots. So there are roots which can help society.
I'm curious about the example of Burning Man, because
yes,
there is certainly a lot of decentralization. So it's everyone, and part of that requires people to be a little more self-sufficient and bring their own food and bring their own water. But there's also a collective aspect where there are aspects of the market economy, like specialization, games.
Yes.
But I'm wondering about how these rules emerged. Was it through a participatory process, or was it more from top down, like groups of leaders?
Through participatory process.
Okay.
People came and they let me offer you a massage. Someone was feeling really exhausted in the heat. Okay, so come in our tent. Let me offer you a massage. Or I got my art. Oh, what a nice chain. I give it to you. So it started with this small
and were there
and then people came with more ideas. So it's
who enforces the rules? Who is enforcing the rules? Was there people who decided to become quote law enforcement?
Yeah, they had to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
But that was exactly when people started to be killed.
Oh.
Yes, and because they were driving drunk, in the very beginning. So yeah, so at night and they. Yeah, so not to be killed, but I mean there were accidents, car accidents in the beginning, and then they did rules. They had to do the rules like policing, let's call it this way. So it is necessary, obviously, to have some law and order, but more emergent and honest and ethical. So and with common sense. Right? So therefore now cars are not allowed. It's not, so it all emerged. Yes, but it emerged, and of course there are occasional accidents from which you learn.
In your previous slide, you described this risk aversion that people tend to have. So how do we get to this point of crowdsourcing these institutions and see that your organic government is realized without losing the human development and accomplishments as a society that we already have? We don't want to put those things at risk. How do we find that balance, and most importantly, how do we convince people and roll out these things? The blockchain voting, creating the political will for something like that. That's just maybe one of many facets that you could describe. Please, Dr. Ulieru.
Absolutely. So blockchain voting is blockchain voting, but your question is much larger. And incidentally, I just have the answer here. So it requires a radical shift and an effort on our side. Yes. Versus, of course, it's much easier if you spoon feed me. Yes. Just stay and sing and you just feed me. Yes? That is how we actually are doing the education today. Regurgitating. Well, we have to make the effort and sing for ourselves. So thinking-based education, yes, failed fast, as you know. So there was an accident, but now we learn very quickly. But you have to let people also break some rules.
You have to give people freedom to experiment and try new things, because that's how progress is made.
Some glass to learn from mistakes. Otherwise, we don't progress.
And there's a fair amount of that going on in digital environments. People are creating different experiments with governance in places like Second Life and many other places like this. So there's bodies of literature on this.
Agreed, and exactly. So what I'm answering here is that actually, if you give people that freedom, you get a lot of much more contribution. Because in our top-down way of organization, like one team lead can only have 5 team members, and it's like so much waste in between, all this waste, all this friction. Then I have to report to 3 other people, and it's a mess. So now, so for example, here you have government, it's an example for government, yes. Now you can, if you can harness the crowdsource, as we do with Singularity Net, for example, the collective intelligence, you can create much faster and much better rules, and also local rules, which work for the people in a certain community, which may not work for another one. So this is a way, and in our book also we had the privilege to have the wisdom of Bernard Lietaer, who actually is the creator of the euro, but they didn't do the euro as he wanted, and he wrote The Future of Money. And he showed how community currencies can actually embody the values of a certain community versus another, which can have another community currency. So down to the fine level of how you reward, how you exchange value. What is value? Maybe for my community, value is a sacred stone. And I will actually attach the value to that. And actually on the island of Yap, people have those kind of currencies, those big stones. Maybe for my community is, as we were mentioning, longevity. Then I have a different system of values. So to give people that kind of freedom to actually exercise their values through governance which is emerging, and that is where algorithmic governance can help, but also through the currencies which can be deployed on blockchain. I'm going maybe too far with my futuristic dreams, but
that's actually what my next question. We introduced this talk by talking about Estonia, who has the most advanced e-governance, well above that in the United States or other developed countries. But so if it were up to you, what would you see a country like Estonia do next to move closer to that fully realized new sphere, to move closer to that full decentralization?
So that I'm even not talking only about a country, Estonia.
Yes, post-nationalist.
In that regard, because I was mentioning about it is, and because I was mentioning about community currencies, this is of course an issue which affects everybody. It's about the economy, and we have so many, and one is not here at the door. So many economic crises and financial crises, one after the other, and it is because of the same reason, because the system as it is designed is not working. We had a meeting at Bretton Woods, 75 years from Bretton Woods this year. So, and especially to discuss this, how do we embed the values in our currencies? And so I'm working with, not with Estonia, but with the Marshall Islands on their sovereign currency. And they are actually departing now from the US dollar because the US aid will sunset in 2021. And they're creating their first currency ever. So they want to do it to embed their values, which are their tribal values there, what matters to them to have in that way of exchange. And so we are helping them to figure out on
can I ask a question?
with those kind of rules. So I don't know, your question, I didn't finish with Estonia, so coming back to Estonia, I think it's not, because what we were talking about, I was going in my, on my trajectory now with virtual currencies, yes, and how we can actually design those community currencies with virtual currencies. So Bangkok, for example, is doing that. It can integrate in an economy several currencies. We can have stable currencies now, and they are implementing in Kenya and in other parts of Africa community currencies around their values. Mama Hope. So there is a big family who is the mother figure who they respect, and around that all the economy is being created. So everywhere is different, but in Estonia, well, I do not know in that way. I mean, I do not know if they are looking into using cryptocurrencies as currencies and so on.
I guess my question was also just where do you see this evolving in the coming years based on what's already beginning to happen in these more advanced systems?
I see, and also yes, it is, but I also have to say that history is playing an important role here. Because of course Estonia has a different drive than the US, which is, at least theoretically a free country, right? So Estonia had to find and fight for its freedom, yes, because it was occupied for so many years. So those people, when they found themselves, okay, now we can take our destiny in our hands from that oppressive system which I was describing there, that totalitarian hierarchy. So of course they were like a spring, and with all that energy, yes, let's be creative. And they also, yes, I mean, they chose the right people. Obviously, if you have freedom to vote, you will choose the right people for you. So that was number one first, yes, to choose, to make the right choices for yourself. And I think that's where it all began, because then they were supporting the investments in innovation, the investments in the digital. And of course, once you have the digital, you can deploy the services from better medicine to having all your taxes automatically calculated, as well as the bill which you have to pay at the medical doctor. You do not need to call the insurance to find out how much I have to pay, who is paying, when, or if I have a car accident, to wait 3 months until I get a response, and who is paying and what's happening. So.
Yes. And Estonia, they have this tax system that's integrated into this e-governance. And the United States could easily be doing this as well.
Absolutely.
It's a tragedy that we don't.
It is a tragedy of the commons that we don't. Indeed, I agree. Yes, agree. And including with the insurance industry, we have to.
So speaking of tragedy of the commons, I know it's an economic phenomena that is part of academic theory, but could you just explain the relevance of that concept to cyberspace and like decentralization of the government? And you also mentioned Elinor Ostrom. Yeah, Ostrom.
Actually, she is the one who solved the tragedy of the commons.
So you said that she sort of came up with some policies to address that.
Yes,
could you detail more?
I have them written here. I just have them prepared for you, and because I do not have them on the slides, but on the slides I have that example with the energy. So I'm going just to simply read them for you here. So the message of her work was that groups are capable of avoiding the tragedy of the commons, which without requiring top-down regulation. So she summarized the conditions in the form of 8 core design principles. Clearly defined boundaries at number 1. Number 2, proportional equivalence between benefits and costs. Number 3, collective choice arrangements. Number 4, monitoring. Number 5, graduated sanctions. Number 6, fast and fair conflict resolution. Number 7, local autonomy. And number 8, appropriate relations with other tiers of rule-making authority. Polycentric governance. So now she got the Nobel Prize for this, but now try to implement them as humans, right? If you put them into the infrastructure, into the digital environment, which we have done, and you can apply those principles to every kind of application, for example, energy consumption, water, and so on and so forth. It's much easier if you have them embedded than to think, oh, which principle do I apply now, So that's the idea of algorithmic governance. You can be governed better by the algorithms.
So I was wondering about sort of the network structure that you displayed, which was decentralized, and I guess my question is, are you arguing for full decentralization in the sense of like a fully connected network, or some kind of hybrid? Because I would almost think that it might be beneficial to have a small amount of top-down regulation, but have it be sort of weakly connected to the rest of the network, just to sort of guide the general direction of things, and then the rest of it could be decentralized and sort of form their own rules. I guess my concern with a fully decentralized system would be that the different groups would sort of become tribal, and they would start to compete with each other, and maybe there would be detrimental conflicts, and it wouldn't be it would, and also it'd be very difficult for people to move between groups and so on and so forth.
True, absolutely true, and this is exactly the essence of my chapter in that book, which he mentioned. It's called Organic Governance, and I will explain it to you. But we learn this from nature actually, because that's how we evolved. It's in our DNA. It's a genotype and a phenotype, and this is exactly it's a parallel between that and applied to organizations. Yeah. So how do we enable that top-down and bottom-up merging, and how do we actually mix it in a perfect way? With algorithms, of course, we can think of that. But so self-organization, but guided. It's guided total freedom. So that's the idea of those rules. Which the top-down part is the guidance, but it's very gentle. It's like a nudge. It's just like evolution is. It's not like sometimes it is catastrophic, yes, collapse, but most of the time it's very gentle. So it's gradual. So number one is, yes, we consider the desired organizational structure as a phenotype. And then we have the set of rules, which are the genotype, for each individual to facilitate cooperation and collaboration, such that the structure which we want can merge. So if I worked actually, I'm sorry about this, that it's very complex, but I worked on emergency response for, like the Vancouver Olympics or Katrina, 9/11. So I worked with NASA actually, and Bob Dolce, who is a legendary emergency response leader at NASA, who was in 9/11 and in Katrina involved. And we got all his wisdom possible. But the idea is that the institutional norms can emerge from individual-agent interactions. And this is a structure which is very effective. It consists of several organizations, firefighters, health department, and like really, we had all of them with us, and we did simulation exercises in ports and in cities and so on and so forth. So you end up with this structure, which is called a holarchy. So it's from holonics, from Ken Wilber's work on holonics. So the idea is that you start with the agents, and then so this is like from the bottom up, you end up with that structure in which you have participants from all the organizations. You have your firefighters, you have your, let's say, the ambulance, and then they come and work together. But here, how they work together, these rules are embedded in the algorithms, and they emerge from the individual agent interactions. So we can learn by observing what is effective in our organizations, and only with algorithmic governance we can do that. So it is, it is like cellular organization. So the members create the organization, which in turn shapes the individual, obviously, yes. And we have we will also determine certain attributes that belonging, connectivity, autonomy, and what makes a competency set. So there are a lot of factors which we can consider when we design that and when we embed it in software. It's science, and of course, I have almost 300 publications, but it's not only me. I work with, they are all on my website, by the way, theimpactinstitute.org, if you want to look at them, but I will be very happy to send them to you.
I'm really curious about that last figure, with the previous figure. Yeah. Actually, go one back. Well, okay. I was wondering how the feedback works, going from the individual agents back up to the higher. How does the feedback work?
And that is what what we say the holarchy. So it's about the whole in the art. So what Wilber postulated, which is kind of natural to say like that, from the solar system to the atom, the universe is self-organized in nested hierarchies. Solar system, planets, atoms, and atoms have electrons and so on. So it's these nested hierarchies, and then our societies, why not organize them also in nested hierarchies? So if I'm looking at, for example, a university. We are here at Princeton, yeah? So we have the rector, the office, then we have the deans of schools, we have the head of departments, we have, so it is, and those which are the lower levels are subordinated to the higher levels, but on the other side they have independence and autonomy within themselves. Also, yeah, the US, yes, these are the states, these are the cities, so you deal here with snow removals at the city level, at the state level you deal with education and health and other, and here you deal with national defense and what's happening in DC. So actually it is, and here you have other countries, right? Again with their systems. So you have cooperation with peer, country to country, but then you can have cooperation between states and other states or provinces, for example, in Canada. Yes? So this is how it works. And you can,
yeah, this diagram makes some intuitive sense to me.
yes.
I was a little bit confused about the previous diagram with the fire departments. I wanted to ask you about that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Maybe
Okay.
I can explain to you here, but I want to go back still, if I can.
Please, yes.
To this diagram. Because
Yeah.
This is what it says. Yes?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
look here what we have. Yeah. So we have all this enterprise, all this. So you would have, for example, a security hierarchy. This is the example here. So you have emergency response hierarchy with enterprise, and this is explained in much more detail when you zoom into each of them, and you can see much more into them in my papers. But the idea is that this is the highest level which I mentioned. For example, the fire department hierarchy, and then you have the incident commander, the officer in charge, and then you have this crane truck, so they can go and extinguish the fire. So even the utensils which they use are also considered horns. So me as a firefighter, I'm one horn, and then the crane and the hose is another horn, and then I cooperate with it.
I guess I was wondering what these big arrows were on the sides. Is that like feedback? It seems like there has to be some mechanism for feedback from the lower level units to the higher level.
These are
Or
different hierarchies.
the subunits.
And they are nested. I agree, yes,
Right.
but it's not only from the lower levels. Feedback is among all of them. So,
Okay.
So it is it's a bit more complex, the feedback. It's like in a biological organism. If you have been at the talk this morning with the spaghetti code, when he spoke about that in the longevity talk, it's in a similar way it works here as well, So we have the spaghetti code kind of feedback to extract what is necessary. And that is what is necessary are these attributes, and then we work with them, with the essential, and then the system getting nudged is adapting to, so that can be to adapt the system seamlessly and gently.
Let's talk about what's likely to happen with adoption of this governance model. How is it adopted at scale? For example, is a city-state more conducive to this model? Is a nation-state as it presently exists? Is it something larger?
I think it works at all levels. So for example, well, I like the concept that is of liquid democracy. I will give you this example. Exactly. So if I am at the community level, even not city level, yes, I mean my district, right? So I have a representative, yes, and I want to enforce. I have some wishes, right? And he is giving me a few choices, or allows me to come with proposals, which is even better. So I go with proposals, I write them, and he has a list of proposals, and then everybody in my community who is interested can vote on them, and the one with more votes. So you can do this liquid voting at the district level, and then at the city level, and so on. So I don't think this is, as I was saying, the right question where it is. It's at all levels, but you have to look at them as nested hierarchies. It's very much local because that is where I live, right? And I am interested in my community, and the water there, and if there are fires, or if I have power tonight, so I can wash my kids with hot water, or whatever it is. So that's what burns for me. Okay, maybe, I can think about the people in DC or in other places, but if I'm in California and in the dark, I first think of that, right? So, and then at the higher levels, depending on those, for example, you can think of taxes, or you can think of education, or it's equally important, but you can collect from those initial, let's say, lists, then from the district levels, the representatives collect them, and then they talk to those at the city, and so on and so forth, and then higher levels at the state level, and then they meet in Washington D.C. and in Congress and at the House, and they debate that. So it is a process with that feedback which you mentioned. That's what I'm talking about. You understand now? Yeah. So that is, it's not such a linear question.
Yeah.
Where does it work more or less?
I just feel like we need more feedback from
Yes.
when we do have these hierarchies.
Good question, because I could explain the feedback at least.
But anyway, that's just.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've just got a few more minutes
Yeah,
here.
we have a few more minutes. I'd like to conclude by referring to a conversation that I had with Dr. Andrew Sandberg before his introductory presentation at the beginning of Princeton ENVISION. We sat and spoke for about 2 hours in a casual conversation.
Wow.
And this is a little
I
bit,
was there.
yeah, it was fun. This is a little bit of an existential risk description. We are at the verge of breakthroughs in advanced algorithms where we could see something like a algorithmic master key that is able to unlock all institutions at the national or corporate levels. This is something that might derive from quantum computing or some other model potentially.
That danger is there.
Yes.
As much as the danger
And
of a big meteorite hitting us and us not being ready.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think that's the probability.
It's a prospect that could happen in a few years.
Yes.
So he's working, and you have with different kinds of three-letter agencies that sometimes game out these kinds of problems. How does this relate to e-governance? Well, something like this being unleashed could create a situation where there is potential for a hot war between China and the United States, or something like this. These three-letter agencies might conceivably create a contingency plan for an e-governance that would be rolled out in this instance of some institutional chaos because of this algorithmic master key. Let's conclude.
It's of course.
But let's conclude by thinking in as big of terms as we possibly can about a one world government. What does that look like in your mind?
Yes, so we can go that far canonically, and then we can go Star Trek, one universe government or one galaxy government, and then
well, there's not people out there yet.
multiverses government. I'm just saying you can go a lot in integral philosophy, which also can be what is the father of that. We can go all the way up and all the way down, again back to the DNA and to the cells and to how life was formed. So with regard to one world. I am all for what the Beatles were saying, yes, all we need is love and everything. However, I still believe that the solution for our world will come at the local level. I'm a big believer in that, and that's why I'm saying the community currencies, but design also, as you were mentioning, in a moronic way, with those feedbacks, so they can work together. And this is where banking, for example, that's what it's doing. It's enabling different currencies to be exchanged in different ways. So those communities can actually collaborate with each other, and as much as they want. Those rules can be changed and flexible and adaptive once they decide to collaborate with another community, for example. And that, in that way, the communities can work with each other, but they can also, like at the state level and then at the country level and between countries. Again, considering those feedbacks, I think we can have a happy world. I do not think we can, and I do not want, under no circumstance, I do not want to have one world ruled in the same way. Because we humans are very different from each other. We are very similar, but also very different.
Right.
Starting with the DNA, that's why personalized medicine, what gives you a certain illness doesn't touch me. And so I need a different kind of medical care than you.
Yeah.
So, I am all for the person. And I am all for the collective, but that is all right.
Respect individuals' autonomy and differences in values and interests among individuals.
And there's no realistic way that such a thing could come to exist if it were not greatly decentralized in the ways that you described.
And this is an example I was mentioning here. So this is, for example, how citizens can get freedom. Yes, from centralized, for example, the government is imposing nuclear power and they want to get freedom. Now with their solar panels and with algorithmic governance, they can manage that and still give incentives, top-down policies, and bottom-up, because someone was asking about top-down and bottom-up solutions. So this is the example which I was mentioning, and I still think it's all about the community. And yes, I hope we can make it. Please continue your work. I really commend you for your work, and congratulations for your accreditation as presidential candidate, and I wish you all the good luck.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ulieru, and thank you for sharing your incredible insights into these institutions for governance and advanced algorithms that are the drivers of this. It's been an honor to sit at your feet.
And let's make it happen.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll become
If you've enjoyed this show and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. And also check out benzion2020.com for updates on the campaign, and go to transhumanist-party.org and sign up, become a part of the Transhumanist Party.